Wise Child by Monica Furlong. Chapter 1. Juniper. Juniper was different from us. In the first place, she came from another country, Cornwall, and although she spoke our language perfectly, apart from the P's, which no one but us could pronounce properly, she looked different. She was taller, darker skinned, and although she had black hair, as Finbar and I did, she did not have our bright blue eyes. Her eyes were a soft dark colour, brooding and quiet. And then again, she did not live as our women lived. She was what in our language was called a Kailich. It meant a single woman, but more than a single woman, one who had something uncanny about her. In our village, the women were the wives of the farm workers, of sailors, of fishermen, with swarms of children tumbling over their doorsteps. The few who were unmarried lived at home and looked after their parents. No women lived alone as Juniper did. Juniper lived away from the village, high up in a white stone house, set on a sort of inland cliff that looked as if a few yards from the front of her garden. The ground had suddenly split open. Behind her house was a great meadow, covered in spring and summer with flowers. Beyond that, as I was one day to learn, was a moor, fragrant with mint and asphodel and bog myrtle. And beyond that again, blue mountains. At night up there, the stars seemed very close, and by day you felt as if you were on the roof of the world. At the front of her house was a winding path that led down to the village. There were sheep tracks and calves in the red wall of the cliff, and caves in the red wall of the cliff. The front of her house looked toward the village, and the back of it into her herb garden and the moor. The most important thing that separated Juniper from the rest of us was that she did magic. When we called her a Kailich, what we really meant was that she was a witch, a sorceress, probably in the pay of the devil. Proof was that she did not come to Mass on Sunday, when the priests held aloft the bread and the wine. She came to the village when people were desperate and did not care any more if Philly and priest disapproved of them. When a man whose wife had laboured for hours in vain could not stand it any longer. When someone was near death after an accident. When a child was delirious with fever. When a woman had an evil spirit, they sent for Juniper. And whatever she did, and no two people ever agreed about what she did, as often as not the patient recovered, it did not seem to make us grateful. On the contrary, it only increased our feeling that she was a witch. I was really frightened of her as a tiny child. Mothers in our village used to threaten their children. I'll give you to Juniper if you are naughty. I wonder if Maeve so threatened me. Of course, Juniper wasn't the witch's real name. Like so many in our village, she was called by a nickname, and in this case, because the plant juniper was a favourite remedy of hers, it was easy enough for people like us to get hold of. We could go and get it up on the mountain, and in a village where many were very poor, it was cheap medicine for many ailments. My earliest memory of Juniper was when I was a little child of 3 or 4, standing in the village street while my grandmother chatted with a group of neighbours. Suddenly a silence came upon us. Juniper passed with a friendly word to the women and a smile for me that I did not return. I buried my face in my grandmother's skirt. I can smell the fusty old woman's smell now. I did not breathe again until the tall figure had passed on her way. My grandmother had put her hand on my head to reassure me, but with childish logic I remembered that she would not do that if Juniper were not dangerous. The first time Juniper and I had anything you could really call a conversation was when I was about 5. I spent a lot of time with my cousins because my mother, a woman so beautiful that she was known as Maeve the Fair, had left by then, and my grandmother was getting too old to care for me all the time. My father, Finbar, was usually away at sea, sailing the angry triangle between Wales and Dalriada and Ireland. Sometimes, too, he sailed to Cornwall or to Brittany and brought back tin or silver ore or copper or finely wrought armour or salt. I was younger then, all but the youngest of my cousins, and an only child who had tantrums when she did not get her own way. Looking back, I am amazed at how patient they were with me, especially as, at least at the beginning, I had more to eat and nicer clothes than they had. Like Juniper and many others, I was not called by my proper name, but by a teasing word that you would translate into English as wise child. This was not a compliment. It was a word for children who used long words as I often did, or who had big eyes, or who seemed somehow old beyond their years. I did not mind it, since I admired my cousins so much and felt loved by them, and it was such fun to be among them and petted by them. It was an autumn day, golden and still. We had gone to the shore and played there, Connor and Domnall, Seamus and Fingal, Bride, Morag, Myrie, Coleman, and me. Then with big baskets we had wandered until we found the fields where the blackberries grew thickly, huge walls of bramble encrusted with luscious holes like red and black thimbles. I did not pick very quickly, because I stopped so often to eat the fruit, but in the end I filled a small basket. On the way home I got tired. It was getting toward dark. It was cold and misty, and the scratches on my arms and legs, which had not bothered me before, began to hurt. The basket felt heavy, and I wanted to be carried. Connor carried me for a long way on his back, and Coleman, always a friend to me, though not much bigger than I was myself, carried my basket. But in the end they too were